Hey there, this lesson continues on transversals, but now we're going to focus specifically on parallel lines that are cut by a transversal. So remember, parallel lines are two lines that go on forever without touching. And when these are cut by a transversal, some really cool patterns appear. So basically, when parallel lines are cut by a transversal, all the corresponding angles are going to be congruent. So remember from the last lesson on transversals, corresponding angles are angles that lie in the same spot along the transversal. So what that means is if I'm looking at my set of four angles here, that means that this top angle would have to be congruent to angle 3. This top angle would have to be congruent to angle 4 because they're in the same spot. Angle 1 would be congruent to angle 5, and angle 2 would correspond and be congruent to angle 6. So corresponding angles are always congruent. Now the other cool rule is if I notice this purple dot and this red dot, these are opposite each other, so that means these two angles are congruent, which means this set of angles is also congruent. So that means in this picture, all the obtuse, or the bigger than 180, angles are congruent. And the same goes the other direction. My blue and my orange here are vertical angles, so they're congruent. And that means my blue and my orange angles here are also congruent. So that also means all acute angles are congruent. So basically, that means if you know one angle in all this diagram, we automatically know everything else. So if we look closer, this problem tells us angle 1 is 30 degrees. So if angle 1 is 30 degrees, that means the one across from it is also 30 degrees. And then we already said the corresponding angle to 1 is 5, so that means 5 is also 30 degrees. And if 5 is 30, that means 4, which is vertical, and corresponding to that one is also 30. So now we know all the acute angles, but you may be asking, well, how do we find out all the obtuse angles? And this is where our supplementary angle rule comes in. Remember, supplementary angles have to add up to 180 degrees. So that means if this is 130, these two angles together have to add up to 180, so that makes 150 degrees. If that's 150, we know the one across from it is also 150. And if I check, 150 and 30 are still 180. Now I look, 2 corresponds with 6, so that means both of these obtuse angles down here are also 150 degrees. So basically, once you know one, it's just a giant jigsaw puzzle and you can fill in all of the others. I love these problems because really there isn't a lot of work. Once you know one angle, you can find everything else. So now let's look at how they might try and trick you. In this problem, first thing I'm going to do is if I didn't have it drawn, I would draw this. And then with my highlighter, I'm going to highlight my transversal to make it easy to see my corresponding angles. So basically, knowing my corresponding angles should be congruent if they're parallel. That means if this is 89, this should be 89, this should be 89, and this one should be 89. So right away, I know S is parallel to V. But it says lists all the lines that are parallel. So we have to double check the rest now. Going back to my supplementary rules, I know that this plus this should equal 180 degrees. So if I go down and check, in order for this to be 189, or for this to be 89, if I add 89 and 89 together, that gives us 178. So that does not equal 180, so that means angle or line T is eliminated. They tried tricking you by putting the 89 there, but we can just ignore that because we know that's not corresponding. Now I go to this one. I have an 89 and a 91. Let's add it up and see what we get. 10, 17, 18, that's 180. So that means line S is also parallel to line U. So in that one, once we know one of the angles, we can follow it all the way down and then just check to see which ones actually add up to 180. So in that answer, there were two that were parallel because they matched perfectly, 89, and this one ended up being 91. So to be parallel, both the acute and the obtuse have to match perfectly. This one's kind of the same. They want to know which lines are parallel. So I know if this is 116, let's go ahead and highlight my transversal. Not the best highlighting job, but it works. If this is 116, I know all the corresponding angles down along the line should also be 116. And now I can check and add this way. 116 and 66 is 182. So that means that one is not going to be parallel because it doesn't add up to 180. Now if I go here, this is a 116. But if I look vertical, it's saying that that angle isn't actually 114. They're saying that it's 114 and not 116. So that means right away, this one's eliminated because the vertical angles are not the same. And now I go to my last one. This says 116. The acute angle under it says 74. So since they're on the line, they should add up to 180. So 116 and 74, that's 10, carry the 1. 7, 8, 9, 190. Oh my goodness, that means none of these are parallel. It is a trick problem. So we have to be careful when we are looking out for those. Let's compare though. Maybe that one isn't the same as these others. So let's look at 114. Let's see what 114 pairs with to make 180. If I do 180 minus 114, that gives me 6, 66. And now I can see if this is 66, this is 66, and these two are corresponding. So that means these two are the parallel. Q is parallel to R. So in this case, it wasn't the 116 and the 74 that were helpful. It was these ones in the middle. So if our first method doesn't work, go ahead and subtract from 180 to find another angle to see if you can get something else to match. And our last problem for the day, they tell us that these two are parallel. So that means we know this has to be congruent to this, and this, and this. So I'm trying to find angle 1. Angle 1, I can see all of my obtuse angles have to be congruent. So that means angle 1 is the same thing as 117.6. got ahead of myself there writing. And now if I want to find x, this goes back to our oldie but goodie we've been doing a lot of. Those two together have to add up to 180 again. So we're going to do 2x plus 12.8 plus 117.6 equals 180 degrees. I don't have any other x's, so 2x plus, we add these together. Go ahead and use a calculator if your decimals aren't so strong. 117.6 plus 12.8 is 130.4, and all of that equals 180. Now we subtract the 130.4 from both sides. That gives us a 49.5 equals 2x. Divide both sides by 2, and that gives you x is equal to 24.8. So now that I know x, I can do 2 times the 24.8 over here plus 12.8. So that's going to give me 49.6 plus the 12.8, and that's going to give us an answer of 62.4. So all of the acute angles are going to equal 62.4, and all of the obtuse angles will equal 117.6. And if we check it and add those two together, it should equal 180, since one acute plus one obtuse has to equal 180. Hopefully this lesson has helped you make sense of when parallels are cut by a transversal. I look forward to seeing you next time.